Hello everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Holland Land Office Museum's Artifact Video Series. My name is Ryan Duffy, I'm the director of the museum, and this week I'm going to talk to you about the precursor to the Holland Land Purchase, and that is the Phelps-Gorham Purchase. Now, the history of the Phelps-Gorham Purchase will take us all the way back to 1786, when a dispute arose between the states of New York and Massachusetts as to who had control over what would be the western portion of New York State today. Now, this dispute arose because in the colonial charters of both colonies and then states, their rights to the land stretched all the way to the Pacific Ocean and actually interfered with each other in this area. So this would have to lead to a compromise, and eventually this would happen in 1788 with the signing of the Treaty of Hartford. And the compromise that arose was that Massachusetts would have the right to sell the land and have the preemptive rights to the land, as this was beneficial to them, as they could use the funds from selling the land to pay off their debts from the Revolutionary War. On the other hand, New York State would then gain the right to administer those lands, and anyone who bought and settled on those lands would become a New York State citizen. And this was very beneficial to New York, as they had made promises to their war veterans that for their service they would be given parcels of land which they did not have in the current boundaries. So in the end, the Treaty of Hartford was actually beneficial to both Massachusetts and New York State and solved their most pressing needs after the Revolutionary War. Now, the state of Massachusetts sought very quickly to find a buyer to this, and the first persons that they found was a corporation going by the name of Phelps and Gorham. The namesakes for these were Oliver Phelps Nathaniel Gorham, who were prominent businessmen in Massachusetts and had started to pool money together in order to get into land speculation. And they were the ones who approached the state of Massachusetts looking to purchase what was to become the equivalent of 6 million acres, which stretched all the way from Seneca Lake to Lake Erie. Basically half of New York State today. The land to Phelps and Gorham happened on April 1st, 1788, in which Phelps and Gorham were to pay $1 million to the state of Massachusetts for that land, which they could pay in 3 yearly installments. It was then up to the corporation to extinguish the rights to the land of the Senecas and then open up the land for settlement. They set off and create their first office in Canandaigua, while also having an office in Connecticut in order to draw settlers from the New England states to this new wide open land. First they had to deal with the Senecas in the eastern third of that sale, which was basically from Seneca Lake to just about Rochester today, a little bit past, but that's a general marker that we can deal with, basically up to the Genesee River. In those negotiations, Phelps and Gorham paid the Senecas $5,000, which extinguished their rights to the easternmost portion, which was the equivalent of about 2.25 million acres, and began settlement of that area. However, they still had ownership over the western 2/3, but Phelps and Gorham were never able to open that land up for settlement, as by the second annual installment of payment, they had actually defaulted on it and were not able to complete their payment to Massachusetts, and thus were never really able to do anything with the land west of the Genesee River. As a result, the land reverted back to the state of Massachusetts, that portion, and Phelps and Gorham were left really without any idea of what they were going to do. And this is where Robert Morris actually steps in, as he is the one who purchases the western portion from the state of Massachusetts, but he also purchases the lands that Phelps and Gorham had already settled east of the Genesee River, and he purchased all of that land as well for about 11 or 12 cents an acre. And then he flips that very quickly, at least most of it, to what becomes known as the Pulteney Estate, and is able to use those funds and then in order to continuous purchase of the western portion. So the Phelps and Gorham Purchase is instrumental in the development of the Holland Purchase, as without that first purchase, maybe the Holland Purchase never comes to be, or at least the process is much more different than what it actually turned out to be. Now, if Phelps and Gorham hadn't got in over their heads, maybe we'd be talking about the Phelps-Gorham Purchase stretching all that way. But it was a tremendous undertaking by this corporation in order to try to settle 6 million acres. It's just unable to be fathomed, at least by my mind, and maybe yours as well. But even though it was a failure, it was the precursor to other successful ventures and allowed the names that we know today to actually come into the area and make their impact. But this all starts with the Phelps-Gorham Purchase. The area today that we know as the Phelps-Gorham Purchase, even though at the time it stretched all the way to Lake Erie, encompassed quite a few counties as we see them today. You have Chemung, Schuyler, Ontario, Seneca, Wayne, Monroe, Livingston, Allegheny, and Steuben counties, at least a portion of them, or if not entirely encompassed by them. So a very large area in its own right, though it is dwarfed somewhat by what becomes known as the Holland Land Purchase. Phelps-Gorham Purchase still settled a large portion of New York State. Now, Phelps and Gorham, you can still witness their impact and legacy, as if you go into Canandaigua, you actually have Phelps and Gorham streets right near the Ontario County seat there, and you also have the towns of Phelps and Gorham within the county. So today, the names Phelps and Gorham are still seen in New York State, even though their actual impact has long since passed. But I hope you enjoyed this edition of our Artifact video series, and if you happen to miss any in the past, feel free to go check them out. All of them are up on our YouTube channel, Holland Land Office Museum, as well as on our other platforms. But and we hope that you stick around for any future ones, as we're trying to do these every week, and trying to show off some of the things here at the museum, or at least the stories that we have here to tell. And if you enjoy them, please feel free to stop by the museum and witness them for yourselves.